All hail the power of Jesus' name, let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all.
Welcome everybody to the Tag You Were It podcast. I'm Ray Ray.
I'm David.
And we've got Daddy Van Bebber back on the line. How you doing this evening, sir?
I am well here in Riley, Kansas.
Oh, yeah, Riley, Kansas. So we are crossing state lines in this episode to talk about the Equality Act. So we'll get rid of the housekeeping. We don't need to get into that because we could probably take hours on this topic, so we can skip that kind of stuff anyway. But David Sr, I guess Daddy Van Bebber, thank you for joining us again. I think this is the third podcast of 2021, so I think we had a gap with you not being on the podcast for a year, and now in 1 year, this is the third time we've had a good time with you.
Well, actually, I think that was in December of 2020. He did two programs back to back. This is the first time of this year, if I remember right. I could be wrong.
Yeah. Whichever it is, we've already discussed how time flies already before the show. But guys, thank you guys that are live with us right now, and everybody that's listening to the podcast when that gets put up anyway. Thank you guys for being a part of this. But this discussion is brought to you by the fact that we do monitor YouTube comments.
Yes.
So we thank you people on YouTube that asked if we were going to ever hit the Equality Act, and we're like, hey, this is what you want us to talk about, so we will definitely do so. So here it is, and we have brought David Van Bebber Sr. in as another voice in on the discussion. So with that said, I guess we'll ask the question, what is the Equality Act?
Well, we should say, before you do that,
okay,
just in case there are some people, David Van Bebber Sr., who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
I am a pastor. I've been a pastor for over 37 years. I've been here in Riley for 35, and at a little church called Fostoria Baptist Church for over 28 years there. And I am a bivocational pastor. I'm currently a transportation director for the local school district. I have a wonderful wife of 38 plus years and 5 children and 11 grandchildren. And I went to Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary and Southwest Baptist University. And enjoy history. It's my undergraduate degree, and enjoy theology and study of the Bible, and that's all good things for me. So I was a news junkie from an early age. So there you go.
And this is definitely something that's in the news and that we're seeing play out right before our eyes. And we've got to educate ourselves about what's going on, and knowing that it's not just actions flying around, but there are religious issues going on, even if it's not centered on Christ, but there is religious issues. There are religious actions that are being played out that we need to, as Christians, understand what's going on, view them from our worldview and how that we view things, and be able to speak the gospel ultimately into these issues. So, that's why we're here. You're a pastor, you're speaking issues all the time. You're trying to apply the gospel to people's unbeliefs as far as, sanctification and discipleship. Or if somebody comes in and is not a believer, you're applying the gospel to them in that situation, and whatever they're facing in their lives that they're coming to you for. And so let's speak into this issue of the Equality Act. But I don't know if I'm
sorry. I apologize. You can see how informal we are. We do have these questions. So Adam, take it away.
Take it away. Yeah. Anyway, but so let's get into what the Equality Act is. And I know that we asked you to come on the show, Daddy Van Bebber. So you go first. What is the Equality Act?
Well, the Equality Act, it seeks to include activity, specifically LGBTQ plus activity, and make them a protected class within the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It mostly, not exclusively, but mostly changes the statements within the 1964 Civil Rights Act about race, sex, and nation of origin as protected classes. It seeks to include all of those LGBTQ plus activities. It really goes back to the Civil War. Isn't that odd? They passed the 13th and 14th Amendment. No slaves, equal justice for all citizens under the law. And the slavery thing ended quickly, but that equal justice under the law got thrown under the bus pretty quick. So there were a series of civil rights acts that were enacted to try to curb and stop injustices against mostly African Americans. And those kind of came to a head in the 64 Civil Rights Act. Says you can't discriminate people based on those three categories. And it really included a lot of things, public accommodations, just the whole list of ways in which mostly blacks and women, also that was the sex inclusion there, and foreigners from being treated badly. And so that law was passed in 64, and now we're in 2021, and they want to include those folks as a special class. Just again, go through that 64 bill, insert that LGBTQ plus. There's some other inclusions, but that's the main focus of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because just I want to critique just a little bit of a thought there, because just based on that fundamental assertion that you would take the 1964 Civil Rights Act and you would insert LGBTQI as a protected class, the problem with LGBTQI is often the plus sign that also follows it, which means that it is a very ambiguous and vague term that has a definition that is expanding to no matter what. Now, this is where it becomes problematic, because what if the I, then we add a P to that by meaning pedophile? We now have, because it is a plus, it does not have a definitive objective term and therefore is expanded. So when we add a P to the end of that, we then begin to say, well, now pedophiles, because by nature, the term with the I or with the plus sign means that it is expanding. It is inclusive. And that term inclusive has a means, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, when we use a term that does not have a objective meaning because its meaning is expanding, we actually bring a limitless term into the nomenclature and therefore do not actually say anything. But of course, it does say something, but we've created a very serious categorical problem. And I'm glad that you put that historical element into it. The 1964 Civil Rights Act. You know, I wasn't alive in 1964. You were pretty young in 1964. But as someone who studies history, what essentially, if we're inserting LGBTQ plus I whatever into there, what did the 64 statement of the 64 Civil Rights Act actually do? Did it repeal things? What did it declare? I mean, in a brief statement, you kind of covered some of that, but give us a little bit more clarity on that, if that's okay.
Well, there had been a whole bunch of civil rights cases through the Supreme Court. And again, one of the things about Supreme Court cases is they speak to a specific case.
Okay.
They set precedent in law, but it's usually not all inclusive. Even this Equality Act seeks to codify what they have not been able to get throughout the entire court decision. Like when they got done with the I'm trying to think of his name. I had it here earlier. It was the versus Clayton George case. The let me look here. I had it here.
That's all right.
It's okay. Bostock decision. Thank you. The Bostock decision. That was a crazy decision back in my mind back in July of 2020, where they decided to include sexual orientation and transgenderism into the meaning of the word sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And even Gorsuch, who sadly wrote the majority opinion, said, well, we know they didn't mean that back then, but homosexuality and transgenderism is sex. So in today's understanding, so we include it. So the protection that the 64 law would give you is that if you were black and you had a job, they couldn't fire you because you were black. There's a positive thing in the 64 Act. You can no longer just say, I don't like your race, you're fired. The Bostock decision now has looped in homosexual, lesbian, transgender folks and saying you can't fire those folks because you don't like their sexuality or transgenderism. The 64 Act also said public accommodations. Again, there was a terrible practice of not allowing blacks in restaurants, certain hotels, certain public facilities. You had to enter a certain door to get into certain even government buildings. They didn't want black folks to come in the front door of the courthouse, go around to the back. All sorts of terrible discrimination that the 64 Act sought to correct. Voting rights were also part of that. Blacks had basically been denied the vote in the South from 1875 on into Reconstruction.
Yeah,
so
here,
these laws sought to correct those wrongs based on race. It also included women. That was the sex part. That's back when sex meant men and women. And also, you couldn't tell a woman, we're going to fire you because you're a woman. You can't have that job. We hired you, but our reason for firing is we decided we don't like women in this department anymore. Or we don't like people who are from Mexico anymore or from Australia. Your accent's funny. We don't like it. So the 64 Act was very controversial. It passed pretty handily in both the House and Senate, but it was still a bitterly fought bill to say, hey, no, the segregationists wanted to hang on to that, and they got kicked to the curb there. Nope, no more segregation. Still took a while to work through all those challenges. And there was a restaurant owner, for instance, who said, I don't want to serve blacks. You can't make me serve blacks. I have a private business. You can't tell me who my customers will and won't be. And the court said, no, the 64 law says you've got to serve whoever comes in the door.
Yeah. So this is the original question, to think about, though. Was the 64 Civil Rights Act, was that against only state sanctioned things, or is there more of a nuanced thing that it's going against? Because it's my understanding, you have Jim Crow laws, you have all these things like you're talking about. The state didn't give them, say, the right to vote. The state said segregate. The state. And now we're talking about private. So was the original 1964 Civil Rights Act against the state sanctioned, or is it a both issue?
It was both. The way they interpreted it was interstate commerce. So if you have a restaurant and someone from out of state could come to your restaurant, you were involved in interstate commerce. So like the little short stop here in town, it's in Riley, Kansas. The people who own it live in Clay Center, and they just have places in Kansas. But people from many states go there and shop. So they're subject to the Civil Rights Act because they're involved. And that was a very broad definition. And again, public accommodations. And thinking ahead to this inclusion now that the Equality Act would try to force on you that definition has only expanded as time has gone on since 1964. So basically anything that takes federal money, state money, or is in any way connected with interstate commerce was how they decided it was constitutional, because of that clause in the Constitution about that Congress can regulate interstate commerce. So that's kind of how we got that bill, and I would say it's functioned not flawlessly, but the claim of the LGBTQ folks, and it's in there in the law, in their proposed law. It's not a law. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, referred to as the LGBTQ people, commonly experience discrimination in securing access to public accommodations, including restaurants, senior centers, stores, places of establishments that provide entertainment, healthcare facilities, shelters, government offices, youth service providers, including adoption and foster care providers, and transportation. And then it talks about and defines what that discrimination is. That's a long list. Mm-hmm. And it takes in lots of folks. I'm not sure who's doing all this discriminating. That's part of my issue with this law is if someone walks into a restaurant or a gas station, they normally serve them and take their money. Now, again, there is and you guys referenced it earlier, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act.
Yeah.
That said, hey, if you have a moral, religious conviction that participating in something is against your morals, your religious conviction, you can't be forced to do that. And this law removes that.
Yeah.
It basically says, no, that doesn't count anymore. So there's all sorts of cases that have been in the news. The baker who doesn't bake the cake, the photographer who doesn't want to take the pictures, and fill in the blank. And those folks could say, I have a religious conviction not to do that. And that's been kind of a iffy spot. This law would remove all the iffies.
Yeah.
And say, nope, if whatever the LGBTQ people want, if you provide it to anybody, you have to provide it to all. Doesn't matter what your religious conviction is.
Well, let's back up just a hair before we move forward and dive in just a little bit deeper. And that causes me to think, obviously, I listen to the briefing every day. I am a pretty good follower of Alpha and Omega Ministries and The Dividing Line. They're probably two of my major podcasts that I listen to. I listen to City of God, but let me hear this kind of from the pastoral standpoint, because none of those people are speaking to it in that particular way.
Yeah.
So as a pastor, why should pastors be informed about this? And then why should the lay church member be informed about the Equality Act? Because most people would say, unfortunately, we do live in a time where multiple things are competing for our attention. I find often in my students, and God bless the students at Spurgeon College, incredibly intelligent students, but I've seen this among people who are in that, 18 to about 30 age bracket. They're not actually getting a lot of news, and I would say that the majority of the public news that is available, they're not talking about these things in a deep, actual, critical way. To quote some people, they would say the drive-by media. Go by real quick and just describe it as quickly as you can, because we need to get to the next thing. Why should we be informed, and why should we even pick up HR 5 and actually take a look at what it says?
As a pastor, it would compel me to perform same-sex weddings, which I won't do.
Okay.
It would compel me if I take my children to camp and we have our boys section and our girls sections at children's camp and youth camp. It would compel us to say, well, John thinks he's Jane and he's going to stay in the girls' dorm.
And when you say compel, do you mean a little bit stronger than compel? It would tell you have to?
Yes. If you don't, we would then be in violation of this law, subject to criminal or civil penalties.
Mm-hmm.
for saying we're not going to do that. And some states already have such laws in place. And I don't know how many have been tried and put into place, but they can fine you. The baker in Colorado, I believe, had a penalty. It was a commission there that sought redress against him. But this wouldn't just be some commission in Colorado or Washington or California, New York. It would have the full force of federal law. So we're going to say we're going to segregate by boys and girls at camp. They'd say, nope, can't do that.
Or how about this? Let me throw this hypothetical and make sure that I'm following. Let's say that someone comes to your church and they are a pedophile. They have done time as a pedophile, and they now say that they are a woman. So no longer does any of their pedophilia against little boys count, because they're now a woman, and they want to be a camp counselor, and you say, no, you can't be a camp counselor. But they say, well, I identify as a pedophile, and so I now should go. That's not a crime in my mind because it's part of my identity. You have to let me go and be a little boy's camp counselor. Any conviction religiously against that, you would be denied. Is that correct?
That's what would be their attempt. And again, because I wouldn't subject myself to that, I would be subject to the penalty, and it would potentially close down Christian camps.
Okay.
Because most Christian camps they don't want to the parents aren't wanting to send their children to a camp where they're subjected to either transgenders, homosexuals, or pedophilia. Although pedophilia, again, it's that opened end in the law. It certainly opens that possibility up. It doesn't specify it. But even just I'll take it for what it says, that a transgender person wanting to serve in the church. Well, we have standards, and one of those standards would say they're moral standards. We'd say, well, you can't hold that position if that's your morality. You can't even be a member of our church with that if that's your stated moral position. Well, we're just in their mind we're discriminating, and so we'd be subject to criminal and civil penalties.
Yeah,
you can't join.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing here, and just to put it out there, is because of COVID, because of the regulations that's been put on the church or whatever, we see that the church is considered a public accommodation. All right. So here's the deal. In point 3 of HR 5, it says lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, referred to as LGBTQ people, commonly experience discrimination in securing access to public accommodations. And it says including, it does not give you an exhaustive list of places, but it just says public accommodations. And we already see it being worked out that the church building is a public accommodation. If it was an exempted public accommodation, then churches would not have to be subjected to the mask wearing and the social distancing. They would say that's the exception according to just the plainly stated Constitution, Article 1. But we found out that they truly believe that the church is a public accommodation. So I think we have every right to believe that this does affect the church. If you look on YouTube, there is a video that I did watch earlier called The 5 Myths. And one of those is this does not affect the church. This is not going to go against the church or criminalize Christianity. That you can believe whatever you want, but until you harm people. Well, is it mental harm now if we do not let somebody come into our church building and utilize a restroom we say that they should not use? Does that harm them mentally? Because now we've got mental problems, and people will go, I was mentally harmed, and so I deserve restitution for the mental anguish that I had to suffer while being in the building with these people that did not let me go into the restroom I feel like I should go in, and all that kind of stuff. So I think we have every opportunity or every right to go, yes, this is going to affect the church. Also on the fact of, you're talking about camps. They don't know what the definition of church is. Do we get to tell them, if they get to tell us what gender they are, do we get to tell them what our church means? And that means that the camp that we have as say Missouri Baptist here, or say Kansas Baptist or whatever.
Kansas, Nebraska.
Yeah.
Got to get the Nebraska in there.
Yeah, the Kansas, Nebraska associations and conventions and stuff. Do we get to define what we call the church and what the church includes? And that includes our campgrounds, that includes this, so they're not a public accommodation. They are a private accommodation to the church and used by the church. And so this is the problem that we face, is we got people that have no clue that the church is the called out people of God. And we do have buildings and we do have other things that we do, but they have to be exempted. And if they're not exempted, then the church will come underneath the scrutiny of this and we will be affected. And we are already seeing it. We can see it in a little way if we are a public accommodation, and it shows again itself by the fact that we are required to have masks and social distance in our churches, right? If we're going to meet in them and not exceeding capacity. So we've already seen the church buildings are a public accommodation, and we are underneath the authority of the federal law to follow it. So how does then we take that information, we bring it into understanding this, we are affected. And so that video is going to tell you we're not. Other videos and other people are going to tell you we're not. But if you open your eyes and you actually observe things and listen to things and critically think about things, yes, we will be.
Well, I want to jump.
Yeah,
Go for
the
it.
key was the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 shall not provide a claim concerning or a defense to a claim under a covered title, or provide a basis for challenging the application or enforcement of a covered title. So your religious freedom is superseded by this law. It would be if it were put into place.
Yeah. So in 1993, if you read that correctly, it also states that they can't do this on religious grounds unless if they have a compelling argument to do so, right? That's the change from the original Constitution, Article 1, where it says, no, there will be no infringement. And then in 93, it says, unless we can infringe if we find a compelling reason to do so. And so that, again, like Dave, you talked about the expanding definition,
Yes.
LGBTQ, I plus, and then you keep on going. So you've put something that will be ongoing. Here, they've already had something that is ambiguous and allows room to continue to define instead of going, here's where we stop.
And they're not ambiguous in who has an out. No one has an out. Religious doesn't. Your religious beliefs give you no out here at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things we are not just talking about beliefs, but we're talking about practicing those beliefs too. And so, we even get into point 7 here of HR 5, which is the major issue, because this has gospel implications and discipling implications, because it says the discredited practice known as conversion therapy is a form of discrimination that harms LGBTQ people by undermining the individual's sense of self-worth, increasing suicide ideation and substance abuse, exacerbating family conflict, and contributing to second-class status, which is a big straw man for one, because this is not speaking from our worldview that we can actually go, no, this is not what we think about people, even though we do discriminate. And there are distinctions that we make and things that we say that, yeah, you're not going to like. But this becomes a straw man issue. But the issue of conversion therapy, if we live in families as Christians, and if it's going to end up being against the individual, my son or daughter, if they come up to me and say that I feel the opposite of what I am and what you're telling me I am, if I pray to go, hey, God, we need your help. We need your strength to understand who we are in light of you making us the way you've made us. Is that conversion therapy? And is that going to be punishable if my son or daughter ends up going, hey, government, my parents are telling me that I am not what I think I am? And
or to publicly preach that you can be changed. No matter what you're feeling about yourself right now, you're feeling a same-sex attraction, you feel like you're a different gender than what you are, then we can pray for you. There's godly counsel. God in 1 Corinthians 6 says there were folks who were converted from being homosexuals and effeminate and child abuse. Those folks were converted. Mm-hmm. And we believe that, we preach that, and this section is one of the more problematic. The whole thing's a problem to me. Yeah. But it's saying if I preach that and teach that, now I'm discriminating against folks. And again, it's taking away not only my freedom of religion, but my freedom of speech. But it can hold me criminally and civilly liable.
Yeah, because what you're going to do is you're going to go out and preach, right? You're going to go out and preach, and you're going to say, God made male and female. God made you meaningful. He has a plan for all of his creation from the very beginning to the very end, right? Yeah. And he is calling out for you to repent and to come and to enjoy, to rejoice as he makes you a new person in the image of his son, Jesus Christ. That is the gospel. And then they come in and they believe you. They believe that what they're feeling and what they're doing. Say there is somebody comes to you and says, I believe that I do have a problem, that I think wrongly about myself, that I feel wrongly about myself, and I want to come to this Christ and to be changed. And then you take them through discipleship, going like, here's some steps we can take biblically to get you from point A, which is, what Paul said. He gives a list of all the sinful things and then says, you were such these, but now you have been washed. And when you take them through especially being a pastor, to tend the flock, to lead them through repentance, to rejoicing in a changed life, that is what people could call conversion therapy. And so basically this is attacking the heart of what the church does, which is discipling.
It is a direct assault on that. Mm-hmm. And there it is. Yeah, there's nothing in this law that it pretends to do a lot of things. I see this one that it's equal protection under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Yes, we all have equal protection, but actions aren't equally protected.
Yeah.
No matter who you are or claim to be, if you rob a bank, there's a process by which we convict that person. The actions here, they're wanting to declare a whole set of actions as normative, and yet historically these are not normative actions, and they have had some of them penalties applied to them, criminal. And certainly if a society says or if a person says that's wrong, I don't want to participate in that, I don't want the participation of that shoved in my face or stuck with the approval of me, I'm going to speak out against it. The Vatican today said no blessing for same-sex unions. Well, they're already in violation. If this law were to become law, if the Senate passed it and Joe Biden signed it, the Catholic Church is now in violation of that Section 7 because they're saying no, that's a moral wrong. Homosexuality, we can't ask God to bless that. Yet this law says, oh no, if you bless a man and a woman in marriage, you've got to bless a man and a woman and a man. And I don't know and a man, and I don't know and I don't know. You got to do all that.
So let me jump to just another little twist on this, because I think this is important. This has kind of been where I've been, while I've been listening to you all, I've been just kind of pouring over a few different ideas in my head. One of the myths that gets perpetuated about this, and if you read HR 5, you'll see multiple things where it's saying, women are a discriminated class. Women are a discriminated class. Look, we can certainly say that there is a inequality concerning wages and gender. That's objective proof, right? Part of that, I just think that there is obviously a inherent flaw in humanity, and that we're always looking for ways to cut the bottom line, and no matter who it hurts. And so one of the pieces that's advocated by proponents of this is that the Equality Act is good for women, and it upholds Title IX of the Education Amendment Act, which prohibits sex discrimination against women. Is HR 5 good for women?
I would say destructive for women because if I'm a woman prisoner in Kansas penal system, and this law is passed, and they tell me that my new cellmate is, well, he used to be Ralphie, but now he's Raquel, and that's my new cellmate. By the way, California has already said if you identify as a woman, you get a right to go to a woman's cell. If you identify as a woman, you can compete against women in sports. If you identify as a woman, you go into a woman's shelter, a shelter for abused women.
Mm-hmm.
If Ralphie, who is now Raquel, says, I am an abused woman, that's what I identify with, well, then I go into the women's shelter because that's mentioned in here, particular shelters. So how's that sheltering a woman? Again, much of what feminism has purported to do and help women has punished women and damaged women. And this is easily the most anti-woman piece of legislation I've seen ever, because it will do incredible harm to women. Why let a guy into a woman's prison?
I've got one for you.
Sense.
Why
let a guy in a woman's shelter or a woman's locker room or any of these places? But this law says that's how it will be if it passes.
The way that I read this law, because it does talk about how it's discrimination now to tell someone that and discrimination is the key piece here. Mm-hmm. Essentially, it is an action of hate. It is a hate crime, essentially, to say, if I own a ballet school that primarily serves little girls, Adam's daughter is in a ballet school. Violet and Evie did ballet in some form or another, right? And girls' gymnastics. If I own that school and the bathroom is connected with the girls' little changing room, locker room, and using your name, Ralphie, who is now Raquel, comes in and says, I'm going into that bathroom, I can't say, no, you can't do that. At the moment that I say, no, you cannot go in there, even though he has a history, even if he doesn't have a history of pedophilia, at the moment I say he cannot go in there, I have now closed the doors on my facility.
Mm-hmm.
There is massive harm there. Here's another one. If I have a daughter who is a great athlete and she is repeatedly beaten by 4 boys who identify as women, she has missed opportunities for scholarships. She's missed opportunity to have an equal playing field in her athletic competition. It's just crazy. The other thing here, one of the things that is purported is that, well, there is so much discrimination against the trans community when it comes to adoption. You see, if there were, and I'm actually going to the bill right now, I believe it is in section 20. Numerous studies document the shortage of qualified and available homes for approximately 424,000 youth in child welfare system and negative outcomes for many youth who live in group care as opposed to a loving home or who age out of care without permanent family placement. Essentially, there's this idea that if we apply this law and it gets passed into law, this bill and it gets passed into law, we have now expanded the field of qualified adoptive parents. But there's a real problem with that. You see, many ministries in the United States that are adoptive training facilities, such as the Missouri Baptist Children's Home, are religiously affiliated. And at the point when we don't say that it is no longer part of it is not in the best interest of our moral convictions to allow our children that are in our care to be adopted by trans families. And again, here's the interesting idea. The terminology of family is expanded as well. So it could actually be 10 guys and one lady who say, well, we're a family, right? That are in some type of polyamorous relationship. At the moment where we say, no, that's not really a family. Oh, and by the way, 3 of them are trans, we cannot allow these kids to be adopted out to you. We're now discriminating, and therefore we have to shut the facility. Likewise, at the point where I, as a parent, a possible adoptive parent, say, okay, we'd love to have this child who has been abused come into our home as a foster kid. At the point where that kid now says, no, I'm trans and we can't do anything about that, you have now lost an opportunity. So at the point where we have to now accommodate these children in their confusion, you've now lost even more families than you have ever expanded. Does that make sense?
It does. And indeed, many, when we adopted children, we went through Lutheran social services, and they had rules about who could adopt and who could not. That'll all be gone. And then I don't know that they're as large as an organization as they once were, but yes, historically, the adoption and care of children was something that Christians took up and embraced and still do. And you're going to lose folks who do this stuff. You're going to lose folks, and you lose prospective parents. The trans community is a narrow slice of confused people.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot more folks who have a husband and a wife who are out there who are taking in children. But if you tell them, here's the new rules, again, you can't tell your child that you're adopting, they can't change their gender just because they're down about it, then you're out.
Yeah. And here's the big thing, and this is the big point, is right now, I mean, there's no definition. The problem with like Roe versus Wade snuck in because it was presupposed in the Constitution that, life begins at whenever God says so, right? And that life, it presupposes that life begins at conception. But what they snuck in Roe versus Wade was the fact that it did not explicitly state that fact. So they go, since it didn't really state that, then it's up to your respective beliefs about when it starts, and then we can go from there. And that's kind of how it snuck in. Here, there is no definitions of these things of, at least legally, when it comes to gender identity and the term sexual orientation. So this is going to codify those as real things.
Yes.
That is not good. So here's the deal. Love your neighbor means if your neighbor is deluded, help them. And so this is going to just codify insanity. It's going to codify the fact that, that there are going to be people out there that need help, but we're saying that they're okay. So we're giving the diabetic sugar. That's the problem. They have a medical problem, and we need to love them. And it's one of those things, I don't want to make fun of anybody. I don't want to make fun of somebody with a problem, but the person with the problem needs help. And I don't mind helping people through these things, but see, you get rid of conversion therapy, right? You get rid of any sort of whatever they can define as conversion therapy. You get rid of that. Again, we've defined it as disciple making. You cut the church out, then we can't help people. You've discriminated against us, saying that we can't do what we are called to do by our God, right? And so then again, that now it's an inequality act in that sense. So now we get these things codified, and now we have a definition that is legal, that that gender identity is real, which gender identity here, just to give you a Merriam-Webster's definition. And this is the problem is, let me clear some ads here. Apparently I wanted to put up some ads over my definition. Oh man. All right. Let me see if I can get over this. But gender, a person's internal sense of being. So it's a person defining themselves. The person apparently doesn't have to accept any sort of reality other than whatever they feel themselves to be. That's gender identity. And sexual orientation over against sexual preference is that it's real, that you are hardwired to say, your sexual orientation is cis, right? So I am hardwired and I can't act against it, that I am attracted to the opposite. Well, sex, gender, I don't even know anymore, right? That's the problem with we're making absolute definitions in a time where we're trying to get rid of absolute definitions. But that's the whole problem of this. So if we legalize this, if this gets passed and it gets signed in, we are legalizing absurdity. That's going to end up ruining everything.
A movie I've found very funny. It's called Arsenic and Old Lace. I don't know if you ever saw it. It has Cary Grant in it. It's a funny film. And his brother believes himself to be Teddy Roosevelt. And he dresses like Teddy Roosevelt, acts like Teddy Roosevelt. And there's no question his brother is not Teddy Roosevelt, but he thinks he is. And in the course of the movie, he's committed to an institution. Because that's what you do with people who deny reality. They, it was a little harmless, but he did some things that were annoying, and he got himself so obnoxious with his delusion that he was institutionalized. But it was a mental illness. And that's what gender dysphoria is. It's a mental illness.
Yeah.
And when we say, well, in the household where he lived, his brother, they all called him Teddy. They went along with it. It didn't help him. It just exacerbated the problem. That's all that this gender identity thing does. It continues to feed a delusion that's harmful to that person. And it is a destructive thing in the end. That's one of the reasons why a couple of the two things I noticed in some of the resources I looked at coming up to this podcast was pray for people who have gender dysphoria. Pray for the lesbian, the homosexual, the bisexual, the person who is so confused. Men, pray for them. You show them love, but you don't tell them it's okay. Mm-hmm. Dave was young and he had 4 siblings, and a couple of his siblings wanted to play with matches. And I said, you can't do that. It's going to cause a fire and harm persons. I couldn't tell him it was okay to play with matches because of the potential for real harm. The real harm is here in these people's lives. And so we do what we can to prevent it. We speak against it. And yet we still don't, we don't hate them. We say, we need to move you from where you're at. But again, this law, if it were to become law, this bill, if it were to become law, it says, no, you can't do that anymore. Yeah. Now, it wouldn't tell me I couldn't tell my kids not to play with matches, or my grandkids, I guess now. But it would say I can't counsel them against any of these LGBTQIs. I'd be in violation. I can't even call them by the wrong pronoun, their chosen pronoun, which makes no sense either.
Yeah, and that's the other thing found in point 7 is the fact that either we're all individuals or we are families. So it says that there's a problem with exacerbating family. How does it say it here? It exacerbates family conflict. Well, it's wrong with family conflict. We just need to destroy the family. Because we're all individuals, and even my 5-year-old son could just say, I feel like a girl and I need puberty blockers and I don't need you, Dad, because really, what is a family? I can just go ask somebody else and they can be like, I can't believe your dad didn't help you out. He's a horrible guy. I'm going to hook you up. That's the way to either there is a family and mom and dad have authority over kids and can say no and should be consulted until the family gets together and goes, this is what family should work. It goes, the mom and dad finally at a certain point goes, you're ready. We taught you. Now it's time for you to go and do as well. In our sense, if you're a guy, go find a wife, and go have another family, go in the Lord and do his will for your life and through your gifts that he's given you. But the thing is, like, what's wrong with family conflict when we're all just individuals? Like, why can't my 5-year-old now just leave the house if he doesn't like what I do? Because, what is family? Well, but if family conflict is an issue that we need to be reconciled in, then we're not individuals and there are roles, there are distinctions, there are things to discriminate. and be discriminating, because discriminating is not bad. Down to the simple fact of, do you like the blue box or do you like Velveeta? You discriminated. I understand that's trivial, but we do make decisions based on likes and dislikes. And so, it's there's the issue. I don't agree that the state should impose any sort of discrimination, which would be the 64 issue. Blacks from the government, from the top down, said, we will segregate. And we needed to destroy those things. But if we don't have private discrimination, we are going to see everybody fighting and killing each other.
Two things real quick, Dad and Adam. I just want to make sure we get these before we close out.
Go for it.
Number one, remember LGBTQ plus I, however you want to define that. There are no guardrails for that term. It continues on to, we've joked LGBTQRSPWX, right? And we've said that in jest, but there actually is a reality in that. There's a rising movement. And it's been on the radar for a while. We've never done a show on it. But the furry movement, people who think that they're animals, essentially, they now identify themselves, I'm a fox. This act would include those individuals in there.
Yep.
Here's where this gets really crazy. When I was a little kid, I would play like I was a dog. My parents have now abused me if I say, no, I'm a dog.
And they say no.
You might think that that's silly, but it's really not. That now is the means by which the government can take a child from your home. So at the point when my parents, when I was 4 years old and playing like I was a cat, said, no, you're not a cat, you're a little boy. That is now a definition of abuse and discrimination against my preferred identity. The other little element, and this is one thing that I think needs to be spoken to. Here we live in a society where we have said that everyone has a right to health care, which is crazy, right? I'm sorry, but it is. I do think that everyone should be treated when they have had an emergency. I think that that's a very important thing. If it's a life or death situation, I think that they need to be treated. But now it is discrimination for a doctor to tell a young woman who says that she's a man, a 13-year-old girl who says she is a boy, it is illegal for him as a doctor or for her as a doctor not to participate in a double mastectomy on a 13-year-old. We live in a time where there is a doctor shortage because of all of the massive amount of litigation. Every year, good qualified doctors are leaving the profession, seriously, because incredible, crazy hours. And guess what? Now they're being told you have to perform this, otherwise we'll sue you. We lose any ability for there to be a higher quality of life when we say doctors have to do this with a gun to their head, essentially, or a knife to their throat, because we'll cut you off. This is the profession that you've trained for. But human flourishing is not going to be, or it's going to be done serious harm, because doctors will be forced to perform sex change operations on children. So a very serious problem that creates a massive issue. Let's end this way, though, because I want to end on a hopeful note. So, Dad, you're the most optimistic person that I know. I believe, pretty darn close. So what would you say to the Christian who now has this, who has been lambasted with all this negative implications of the Equality Act and anxiety about it? What do you say to those individuals?
Always a good idea to contact your senator, because this bill is now in the Senate, and say, hey, this is a problem for me. And I want you to do everything you can to see if this bill doesn't see the light of day. It would, and you can list what you think are the destructive parts of it, which there are many, and let them know. That's always a great option. Now, I've contacted senators over the years, and sometimes they say thanks, no thanks. Sometimes I've contacted them, and I'm sure it wasn't just me, but they changed their position on a thing or two. Not from me, but just because I'm sure I was one of many who said, hey, that bothers me. I don't like your position. And they can change it. So certainly the other side's going to be contacting senators and saying, hey, pass this bill. We should be the other voice in there. We certainly be praying again for those in authority. We're always commanded to do that. Praying for those who are confused, deluded. And as a Christian, I rarely bring up political things. I studies that I've in this act in the Bible studies that I do said this is something to be aware of and pray for and work for. My as being the optimist that I am, I don't think it's not going to get 60 votes for cloture. I don't believe they're going to get rid of the filibuster. So shouldn't pass. But we'll see what happens. So I'm most hopeful in that most Christians in the world don't have these protections. We're in this country where we've been spoiled. I can worship and free and open and honest, and lots of Christians don't get to do that. Yeah. So if they take that away from us, then we're just like the rest. The first century Christians had none of these protections. They were persecuted. Church grew. So it just calls on us, no matter what the government decides or where we find ourselves in a political, legal debate, our responsibility as Christians has never changed. We're supposed to go out and make disciples, preach the gospel, disciples, love people, pray for them.
And I would say, this is going to chew people up and spit them out. And the thing is we're going to be able to be there. And it's one of those things, who cares about point number 7, saying you can't basically saying you can't preach the gospel, bring people in and watch their lives change, especially when it comes to, the specific issue of somebody recognizing I do have a problem and I need Christ. I need the gospel, and we need to give to God what is God's here. Despite, even if it throws us in jail, even if it kills us, right, we don't die. The sting of death is gone. It's not abolished. We'll still die. But the thing is, the sting of death is abolished because we know we go be with the Lord. We know that he is coming one day to judge the living and the dead there will be a resurrection. And then there will be eternity, with Christ, with the triune God, that we get to be with him forever. And so, that's our hope. That's what we look for. But this is going to chew people up and spit them out. The cool thing is, if you read through the Psalms, it's the common thing is they will dig a pit and they will fall into their own pit. That's a common theme in the Psalms that David recognized. I'm sure the first century church, as you're talking about, they probably saw the same thing happen. They dug their own pit and they fell into their own pit. And so now America is going to dig its own pit and it's going to fall into its own pit. And people are going to get hurt. People are going to get thrown out of things. And here we are. We're the church. Now let's give them the gospel no matter what. And that's the hope. The hope is the gospel. If there is no gospel, and if we don't preach the gospel, we're not giving the world hope. If we're not bringing them in because of the gospel, then that's on us, and we're going to be judged for that as well. So, it's continue on, in hope. And but that's, kind of my optimism among the pessimism. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you, Dad, for coming on. Really appreciate it. Yeah. I'm grateful for the historical background on this. I am grateful for the insight and the research that you did. Adam, thank you for the great research you did. It is a pleasure. I think this is like time 7 or 8 that we've had you on. So I appreciate you as a guest. You so much. Very thankful for that. So. Yeah.
So with that said, there'll be probably future talks about the Equality Act. Thank you, YouTubers, for suggesting this. And seriously, we listen. We want content that you guys want us to talk about. If we're not talking about something you want to hear, please let us know. We'll end up eventually getting to it at some level. Especially, thank you for this Equality Act thing and bringing us into the conversation with that. So we hope this has been edifying to you. And with that said, this is the Tag Your It podcast. I am Ray.
I'm David Van Bebber Jr.
I'm David Van Bebber Sr.
And Soli
Deo
Gloria.